Professor Pillay, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Now, the COVID-19 statistics around children put us at less than 7% of all reported COVID-19 cases in South Africa are children, and they're less likely to be admitted for intensive or serious medical care when compared to adults. But that doesn't mean that children and young people have not suffered a trauma of some kind during or as a result of this pandemic.
Good morning to you, Marcel, and the viewers. Certainly, we need to be looking at the impact of the pandemic on our children. I think it's a given that we have almost 18 million children in our country, and 12 million of those children are extremely vulnerable. And we need to be focusing on those vulnerable children. And I think also if you look at the recent information from the Department of Education, that they are concerned about many of the children that have not returned to the classes. And I would suspect that this is because of those children being really vulnerable. But I think going to the point that you raised, if we do not do anything right now with regard to the mental health of these children, research shows that this continues untreated, and it continues into young adulthood and even into adult life. So the important thing is that we need to start almost immediately in terms of dealing with the situation, and not just catering for the physical health of our children, but more importantly for the mental health, because both of them actually go together like a horse and a chariot and a cart. So basically what I'm saying to now is that we need to take this seriously. And the important thing is that we need to find mechanisms to be able to deal with this. Now, going back to the community-based approach that you mentioned, I think in an African context, it is very clear. We go by the saying that it takes a village to raise a child. And that alone tells us that we need to focus on community-based interventions, mental health concerns of children and youth. So what does this mean? It means that all of us working together to be able to resolve the problems, not just focusing on government, but community-based organizations, religious organizations, civic organizations, NGOs, all coming together to be able to solve the issues. I think we've seen this already during the intense lockdown periods, where people were starving, and we found that so many community-based organizations came on board to be able to support, especially people that are vulnerable, people that had no food to eat, and they rallied around these people. So that's the kind of approach that we're looking at in terms of a community-based approach. I would like to give you one more example. Recently, we've been seeing a scourge with regard to child-aided families. And a community-based approach that we've seen, for example, in our local areas in Soweto, in Orlando, we have an organization there that actually takes young women from the communities and trains them to become caregivers and sends them back into their own communities where children are aiding families. And they are able to provide support and try to look at what are the needs of these children as caretaker mothers, in a sense. So I think also what's happening is that government is also reluctant to be able, wanting to put these children into foster homes or to separate them as siblings. So the whole idea right now is to keep them where they are, but ensure that they have all the resources that they will require for them to actually have a good start in life. So these caregivers are trained in the communities to be able to actually do that. We now right now embarking with the National Department of Education to look at the training of learner support agents in the community. These are out-of-school youth who will be linked up with local schools, the schools that they probably went to, and will be able to provide first-line support to learners in those school contexts and to identify learners who are having problems and then refer them to the necessary professionals for the support that they might need. So this is a kind of community-based approach that I'm talking about.
Now, Professor Pillay, that certainly sounds like a step in the right direction, even though when you speak about the vast number of children who are deemed vulnerable in South Africa, it seems like a mammoth task, because those children invariably find themselves within vulnerable families, inside vulnerable communities. I mean, even before we'd heard about COVID-19, we were dealing with a large part of our population who suffer the daily trauma of poverty, who suffer the daily trauma of the legacy of apartheid, traumas that we still haven't actually dealt with as a vaster population. And now you add to that COVID-19. Where does a household start? Before a community trained representative can reach them with the wonderful work that it seems these organizations are doing, where can a family unit of some way, shape or form start with looking at what their traumas are, specifically the younger members of their family, as a result of what we've just been through and are still going through?
I think it's a very important question that you're asking. And the reason being is because it all starts in the family. And we all know that many of the problems that we have right now starts from early childhood. In fact, problems like depression and anxiety and stress can even start as early as during the pregnancy of the mother with regard to the child that she carries. So interventions need to also be focusing within the context of families as well. So even if it's school-based interventions, it needs to incorporate the family at a very, very intense level. So going back to your question in terms of families, I think it's important that caregivers in the families, and especially if it's good if there are parents there, need to know exactly what are the symptoms that they need to look for when the children are having problems. What we have seen so far during the COVID-19 pandemic is that there are increased amount of depression, stress, anxiety, trauma amongst our children. So parents need to identify the symptoms. If children are having problems with eating, if they're eating too much or eating too less, if they're having problems with sleeping, they're sleeping too much or sleeping too less, if they cannot concentrate, they are feeling helpless and hopeless, if they're irritable, and if they're getting rebellious, this is a clear indication then that something is not right with those children. And they need to start taking this seriously, especially in terms of the mental health concerns. So I think the important thing also is that our parents are also struggling as well. And what happens is that they have a lot of anxieties and fears about infected, fears about losing family members, fears about the children being infected. So what happens is that children begin to identify with the anxieties and the fears of the parents, and they take on the anxieties and the fears of the parents. So I think the important thing here is this, that the parents need to be in control of the anxiety and fears so that they're not modeling this kind of behavior for their children. But the important thing also is that they need to be honest about those anxieties and fears. Say to the children, we are anxious, we are fearful of what is happening right now, but let's control the anxiety and the fears, and let not those anxiety and fears control us. So if they're open and they're honest with the children about what they're experiencing in terms of the thoughts and the feelings, we actually create more stability in the children, because they realize that we do not have to pretend about the situations. And here is an opportunity for us to be able to acknowledge our fears, our anxieties, and be able to find constructive ways of dealing with them.
And I suppose the tone of that conversation is very important as well. Important for caregivers or parents or older people in the household to steer away from the boogeyman effect. Don't go out there because COVID-19 is going to do all of these horrible things. That these conversations take place in the correct and more encouraging tone. I suppose that's important as well.
Most certainly. I think the important thing also for us as caregivers to take cognizance of is that our interactions with our children needs to be based on age and even stage of development. So with the younger children, I mean, research shows, even with toddlers and even with babies, if you are more cuddly and you're hugging and you're playing with them and you're smiling at them, those children get reassured. Obviously, with older children, we got to use different strategies. And here we got to talk to them about what they're experiencing and how we begin to deal with those fears that they experience. And the important thing about what you just said now is how we do that. So if we are giving them lectures, and even if our tone comes out more in terms of blaming and judging and accusing, then we are doing injustice in terms of how we're communicating with the children. We need to have a tone that is reflective of being very, very understanding. We need to create a situation where we show that we are listening more to our children rather than just giving them lectures. And the important thing is that we've got to be able to, besides the tone, we're also going to be able to use body movements and body gestures to show them that we are in agreement with them, we are understanding them. Eye contact, facial expressions, and gestures, all those things kind of show the children that you are actually at the same level of understanding as them. So you're absolutely correct. The tone is crucial in terms of how we convey our messages to our children.
Thank you so much. Let's hope we've reached at least one person who was struggling to figure out how to start the conversation with the younger people in their family. Thank you so much. That is Professor Jace Pillay, South African Research Chair for Education and Care in Childhood in the Faculty of Education at the University of Johannesburg.